We all know that conflict and tension is an inevitable part of any workplace. A poor mismanagement of these conflicts can lead to negative outcomes such as employee disengagement, low morale, and decreased productivity. What if there was a way to approach tension from a place of an emotional intelligence, leading to a better outcomes for all parties involved? What if there was a way to learn how to harness the power of emotional intelligence through generative conversation skills to elevate your leadership, transform your workplace culture, and create a positive impact in the world? A very warm welcome to the brand new season 9 of EI Cafe with Azim. And I'm your host, Azim Sahil, a human capital specialist, a Lego Serious Play facilitator, ICF certified PCC level coach, an emotional intelligence and emotional culture practitioner. I am one of the lead facilitators for Luminary Learning Solutions. Here we are again for another interesting 30 minutes of valuable learning. I'm thrilled to be back with another interesting episode, interesting season filled with valuable learning. In the next 30 minutes, we'll embark on an exciting journey exploring insightful topics and expanding the knowledge base. So, today's topic, how generative conversation can solve tension. To discuss this, I have a guest all the way from US. She's an International Coaching Federation Master Certified Coach and an accredited educator who has engaged in adults, teams, and global enterprises for nearly 30 years. Amazing, isn't it? She uses her executive and entrepreneurial experience to cultivate leaders and sustainable excellence through generative wholeness. It's trademarked on her a signature generative coaching and learning process for people, process and systems. Being a better human together requires claiming a true self first, then choosing to live inside out as we transform, evolve, and be resilient. Her colleagues, audience, client, and regard her as a bold, curious, proactive, articulate, and compassionate human being. Isn't that amazing guest to have in my show? And first episode in EI Cafe, Season 9. Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome Janet M. Harvey, CEO, Invite Change. Hello, Janet.
Oh, thank you so much, Azim. And audience, thank you for the welcome. I'm delighted to be here anytime I can contribute to people feeling stronger in their skills. I'm all in.
Absolutely. Janet, first and foremost, thank you very much. I know it's going to be a Friday and it's going to wind your day within a conversation, a generative conversation. So thank you very much for checking into the cafe, and especially the first episode in season 9.
Yeah.
So Janet, generative conversation, right? Season 2 seasons back, I did talk about how do you manage conflicts in workplace. So the term tension is very familiar in terms of conflict. And this is a term which is very well spoken in the corporate world, right? Conflicts. Now, conflicts has been labeled as a negative outcome, but I love the word you breathe, the tension, right? Now, let's start off with this particular question. How do generative conversation differ from a traditional discussion in resolving this so-called tension within groups?
Right. There's a lot to unpack, even in just a little bit you said, and I'm going to do that because I think sometimes as adult professionals, we take for granted that we know something without pushing our chair back a couple of inches and really examining, well, what are the skills sitting underneath it? And one of them might already be happening for your listeners. We're 2 minutes in and they're already distracted. One of the things that is important and fundamental to have a conversation, which we do every day, all day long, we're in conversation, is a new way to do those conversations. That's kind of the first idea. It's not something new to do, right? It's not a new tool. It's not a new process. It's a different way to do what you do every day. So you're going to keep using the skills you've got, but we're going going to calibrate them a little bit. So that means we need to think about generative. And I didn't make this up. You can look this up in the dictionary. The definition of generative is 4 capacities. And I chose the word because I was really looking at what was happening with leaders and teams that helped them to break through the conflict. And I'll come back to the distinction between conflict and tension in just a second. What I started to notice is that their habit space, more often than not, about, can we just get it done, please? I don't want to go through this conversation yet again. When they could perhaps take a breath, pause for a moment, and realize there's so much more than the words they just heard involved in what's created the conflict. There's history. There are all the influences that the other person is under. There's my history and influences that I'm under. There's our respective bosses and key stakeholders, all of whom have their own agendas. It's like, by golly, it's amazing that we ever do break through conflict. And here's the crazy thing. Conflict is a good thing because it's disruptive. It essentially signals to us something wants to be changed. Now, what's true is person A and person B both have a point of view, most of which is spot on. It's the part of each that isn't quite spot on. If we can take a breath and pause and not take it personal and open our eyes to be curious, and what I prefer to say is adopt a state of wonder, which is rapt attention and astonishment that something new might be available here. I have watched teams who can take that breath, who can pull back, not take it personally. At another time, as in we can talk about teaming agreements that support that. But when they engage, they realize, okay, there's more here than I can see. Let me ask the question of the other to be a learner. Learning is a critical capacity of being generative. In fact, making it more important than what we produce, because it helps us to collect the things we miss out of our habit and preference and bias, and often a set of assumptions. Even one small thing, one golden thread of idea that the other person I've been fighting with says, and we go, oh, that makes my idea better. That's amazing. And the other person says, thank you. So here's what I don't understand about what you're fighting with me about. Oh, well, given what you've just told me, here's how I might say that a little differently. We're now in a co-creative process. Create, right? Learn and create. These are generative. Produce. We all know how to produce. But here's where I really think the secret sauce is, which is in that moment of pause, we realize we're standing in a place that's kind of unfamiliar and unknown. That means we have to trust our imagination, our intuition, our instinct, our sensing, the emotional experience we're having. And from that, something original can bubble up. Just like you heard in the example I was declaring, right? That leader says, oh, now that I know your point of view, I have a different idea. That's the originate step. So those 4 capacities: learn, create, originate, and produce. Now, the second piece of generative is that that's not something, if you were a generative leader and I followed the way you do originate, create, learn, and produce, it wouldn't work. Because all of these are things that we must become self-aware and connect to express from the authentic self. So living and being generative is being able to stand in our own authenticity and express those capacities in a sovereign way. Sovereign meaning accepting responsibility that I have an inner authority to choose, to always be a choice about how I relate to something. Instead of taking it personal, I can get curious. And in my curiosity, I can adopt a point of view that is wonder, I can be in rapt attention to something new that's useful.
Wow. Brilliant. While you're talking, it's just something generating on my mind, like the element of learn, right? So, here's my question. You did mention about a small example. You said, like, oh, this is what I see. What you are looking at in my idea, this is how you see it. And it can be, wow, it can be a great idea. It can be better than mine. But unfortunately, there's something stopping us in that between. You mentioned the word self-awareness. Yes, that's really crucial. I have a question on that. But doesn't human being encompass the ego? Stop thinking and listening what the other person says. This is my idea. How come he can't tarnish like that? What if a conversation comes like that?
So Dr. Carl Jung, famous psychologist, helped us to learn that every ounce of ego that gets developed, which is a very good thing, by the way, it's how we learn how to navigate the world. We all need a healthy ego, is balanced by the creation of shadow. And the word shadow psychologically often feels bad, dark, don't want it, push it away. But the truth is there's huge gold in the shadow. Now, we've operated so long without it that we think maybe it's not good for us. So the real inner work is about recognizing that shadow has gold in it. It has wisdom in it. And when we begin to reincorporate those parts that we sat on the bench while we were developing our ego until we could handle these other gifts in us, then we start a whole nother journey that moves us into wholeness. So here's the thing. Shadow shows up for us. Noticing is the micro skill, by the way. Learning to notice when we are reactive. And this is true both ways. So when you hold somebody in high esteem, you value them, they're a role model, they might be the person you emulate. That's actually denying it in yourself. If your listeners and yourself, if you hold up a finger and point it out at somebody, notice you have 3 fingers pointing back. You cannot see in another what isn't in you. You just don't own it. It's unconscious, under the water line, right? So now take the negative side of that. This person's an idiot. Come on, fess up. We all have those moments when we're judgmental. The fact that we're judgmental isn't the issue. It's that we act out of our judgmental position.
Absolutely.
If we can take a breath and notice the judgment that's surfacing and listen a little more deeply, what could I learn here? It takes the charge off of it. And we're often delighted when somebody answers, oh my God, I never would have thought about that coming from you. We just have dispelled all of the personal conflict. The tension might still be there because we're in a creative process and we're trying to figure out how the 2 pieces fit together, but it's not personal anymore. So the micro skill of noticing, and then secondly, it's worthy of my curiosity because I can hear in my judgment, there must be something here for me to learn about me, right? So noticing and making it worthy of my attention, and then asking the question you couldn't possibly know the answer to. And allow yourself to be surprised, to be in that state of wonder. These micro skills are critical in order to be able to transcend and let conflict be a resource, right? The harbinger of change that we all want, and bring you back into the creative conversation.
I think we have been given all these particular, the elements of ego and everything. I think it's for something to better, we have to use it. That's what I am getting what you're saying, right?
Yes.
But unfortunately, we use it for the other way around. And that could be a learning from this particular podcast. My dear friends, ego can be used for good purposes.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant.
I mean, it put man and women on the moon. It
Absolutely.
put man and women in silver tubes underneath the water to see the mysteries of the ocean, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's helped us learn how to recover from volcanoes and earthquakes and tsunamis, right?
And the
we
pandemic.
have ingenuity, right? We have an extraordinary amount of capability as human beings. And that's ego, right?
Absolutely.
It builds strength.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for sharing that. Now, you talked about how the generative process work, right? For our benefit of our listeners, what sort of a technique we can use to have this generative conversation to help us effectively address this particular, resolve the tension in workplaces or even
Yeah.
at home, by the way.
So here's the really big skill. I gave you 3 small micro skills, but they all lead to a big skill practice, which is reflection. And I
Mm,
was thinking about this the other day. Where do we learn about reflecting? I think maybe as little kids when mom and dad send us to our room because we did something naughty,
mm.
right? You go think about this and don't come out until you have. They never called it reflection, but
Yeah.
maybe that was the time we got introduced. But
Mm,
later, we're so struck in needing to be an expert
mm,
that we don't pause and say, how did I get to be an expert?
mm,
I wonder what's the valuable thing I know, and how do I do it all the time? How do
mm,
I make sure I'm consistent and reliable and congruent? Well, those things come out of having a reflection practice. So, in a really practical way, the first thing we want to look at is, ouch, I didn't like that conversation. I didn't
mm,
like the result we produced. It just wasn't any fun. The first step of reflection is to say, gosh, what action did we take that created that? You're an emotional intelligence expert. Sometimes we don't hear the sensitivity. We're caught up in the idea and we don't
yeah.
realize that somebody's having a rough go. But with a little distance, we can look at the actions and the interactions and we can see, oh, I can see how that might be a problem for someone. So now if we go one more step and we ask ourselves, how did I decide to say that? Like, was it a value I
Mm,
was
mm,
trying to protect in some way? Was I attached to some set of criteria about the project we're working on? What did I align myself with to take that action? Most of the time, this operates invisibly,
mm,
but in reflection, it becomes visible. Now, there's another step, which is the clarity step. What motivated me to choose that value or that principle or that
mm,
criteria? And a lot of times it's, well, that's my job. It's my role. Really? Your job over your humanity and the relationship with a colleague? Hmm. If we can call that into a question for a moment, we start to realize, oh, you know what? I'm a little out of balance. If I'm believing that it's my job to make the decision about what actions we take, I
mm,
basically am excluding the other person. No wonder I get annoyed when they challenge my thinking. Oh, that's not really what I want. I value inclusion and collaboration. So now that I'm aware that I have a belief that was operating invisibly tied
mm.
to a value that really isn't shared or useful and driving my choices, I can now construct something a little differently. And I can go and have a conversation with that person that says, you know what, I'm really sorry that I missed your sensitivity here. And I was kind of all up in my head about I need to make this decision and make this happen, but I can't do it without
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And my actions pushed you away. No
Mm,
wonder you're upset. You deserve to be.
mm,
Now we start again. We say, I'm sorry. What do I need to learn from you, person, so that I don't ever do that
mm,
again?
mm,
And now let's come up with a different set of actions
mm,
to produce a more desirable result.
mm, mm.
We
So,
call
Jan,
this a CAR, right? Awareness,
right.
clarity, alignment before action and results, the generative vehicle of change.
Yeah. How long does it take for this process? Because
5 minutes.
why I'm asking this is when we go to corporates, right? I always ask in terms of having conversations because the social awareness is crucial. The more you interact, the more you get to know people, the more you engage, the more you get to know the people. The question is, sorry, we don't have time. We're very busy. That's why I asked, like, how
Okay.
long does it take?
I'm gonna ask your listeners to pull out a piece of paper, and I want them to think about the last week and pick anybody on your team or a peer, it doesn't matter. How many times do they come into your office and ask the same question? Just write a number down. 4 times, 5 times, 10 times, 12 times, whatever the number is. How many times did that person come into your office and basically ask you the same question? Let's just say it was 5 minutes. and it was 5 times, that's 25 minutes. Now multiply that by your salary, right? Whatever your hourly wage is, I don't care, whatever that amount is. Now take that times 30 days or 20 days, I guess, right?
Yeah,
4 weeks.
20.
And make that times 12. It's a big number. How many employees in the workplace? Just take your team. It's a big number. And guess what? You're leaving that on the table because you won't make time for the relationship that would eliminate the need to come back multiple times for the same question. So, time, who is in charge of time? We are. What choice are we making
Absolutely.
to make a priority?
Yeah.
And when leaders recognize that we're out of balance in our transactions higher than relationship, right? That's what we say, we're too busy. But that busyness is costing us not only in destructive leadership and the cost of morale and engagement, but guess what? The opportunity cost for gross revenue, because I'm spending my time answering the same bloody question. There you go.
Thank you very much. I think our listeners got the answers. And I think it's important, right? Because we have been working and we're working as a team. We talk about teamwork. We talk about now collaboration. Now, you're leading to my next question, Janet. Like, how did these conversations create collaborative environment, which reduce tension amongst team members? Because in today's world, you can't work alone. You need to collaborate. Now, today, I can't do this podcast alone. I invite you. We are collaborating to spread this particular message of collaborative conversation with your knowledge and just simply my questions. So collaboration is important. How this element of generative conversation can create a collaborative environment in the workplace.
Right. You just modeled it quite beautifully. One is to recognize that no one person can see the whole situation. And as complex and ambiguous and fast and really accessible, right? We live in a time in history when humanity has access to what 8 billion people are doing all at the same time, but our brains haven't caught up. We're unable to process all of that. And therefore, we must ask other people to help us see the whole picture before we take action. So the learning function is essential, and that happens through relationship, aka collaboration. Right? So that's first and foremost, the environment itself is causing us to be learners together. But then the question is, learning about what? Well, we have a shared purpose. We have a shared purpose on the project. We have a shared purpose on the team. We have a shared purpose in the organization. We're fulfilling a mission. We have customers to serve. Whether it's commercial or nonprofit, it doesn't matter. That's a common language for us from which we can create. We can create the method, the process, the timeline, the resource we use, the people we'll have involved, the technology we'll deploy. All of that can be in dialogue between each other. We're creating the experience we're going to have. When we're in agreement that we understand the North Star, the shared purpose we're going after, it frees us up then to use our imagination. And that's the originate function. And these are happening dynamically. We're not doing these in any sequential step, but we're in our dialogue with each other, starting to construct an experience of something new to produce.
Brilliant. What a way to bring that collaboration. But I think it's important for us to understand we don't work alone anymore. You need to hit someone, and it's important to understand the perspectives. On that note, very short version, how does emotional intelligence come to this picture in terms of generative conversation?
Yeah. You know, I love that emotional intelligence is still alive and well, and it was so important when Daniel Goleman brought it forward. But I'm going to be a little bit of a heretic and say it wasn't enough. We've been teaching people emotional vocabulary because they forgot it. We've been teaching people about sensitivity to shifts in energy that indicate emotion is up. But I think what we've lost is experiential language. We're in an experience all the time.
Yeah.
Our unconscious likes habits because it's an energy conservation. Our neurobiology is wired this way. But we've lost the language of experience. Ask your clients, what experience are you having right now?
Mm,
And they look at you dumbfounded because it's a lost art. But if you put them in the ocean and say, what are you experiencing right now? They'll say, it's cold, it's warm, it's wet, it's windy, it's
yeah,
salty, right? They'll
yeah,
start to
absolutely.
describe. And I think if we restore experience descriptors, we'll have more success with emotional intelligence being embodied and
Mm.
adopted.
I would like to add a small example of that. I generally, when I go and walk into the sessions, I always like, very good morning, everyone. How are you feeling today? Guess what would be the answer, Janet?
Fine.
Good,
I'm okay.
very good.
Good.
So I always ask, are you sure? And you're spot on, Janet, because there is a big, huge gap in society, in our community, in our whole globe, that the element of experience you mentioned is missing. So now I really connect that this experience missing. That's why the generative conversation has been really difficult to have, because we don't understand our own experience. What are we feeling,
Yes.
and
Yes.
how other people feel?
Mhm.
So that's why I'm going to take that as a learning for me. I know pause is very important. You mentioned early in the conversation, pause.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing.
Pause gives more time than it takes.
So that's why I say less is more right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so kind of a tip to play around with is, instead of asking, how are you feeling today? Be more playful with it and say, if you were a weather report,
Mm-hmm.
how would you describe it? It's cloudy, and yet I can see the sun is starting to peek through. And you'll watch people's body relax because they know, you
Mm.
know what? The world isn't all that bad. There's some sunshine on the horizon. And somebody else might say, it's raining and the thunder is loud, and I can already tell my umbrella is not going to work when I walk down the sidewalk. So if you hear a report like that, that's like time to have some empathy and compassion and say, wow, I hear that. And what might you want to say and get support for here before we launch into the meeting? Because guess what? If you don't do it, that person is not going to participate. You will not have
Mm.
collaboration, and they will feel disrespected and unseen. And you do that for too long, and that's an employee who leaves.
And that's absence of generative conversation.
That's right.
Thank you very much for that gift, Janet. Thank you very much. I'm going to steal that. I'm going to do it on my next session. Right. So, Jared, we are coming to the end of conversation. I know when we talk good things, time flies, right? Um,
Yeah.
I'll always like to have some golden nuggets from my guest, for my audience and viewers. What be your one or two golden nuggets you want to give, or a tip you want to give for our audience and viewers on generative conversation?
A really fun way to step into this is, if you're watching a movie or you go to a play, or you are maybe watching dancers, or you're watching an orchestra play, start to think about what you're witnessing. Where do you see them producing something? And
Mhm.
what is it that they produced? How did they do it? What did they create to produce it? Oh, what do they, in their interactions with each other, learn? Improv would be another place to do this. And who were the people that came up with something original, something new? Where did imagination spring up from? And how did people engage it?
Mm.
So start to tune your eyes and your ears to noticing when generative is occurring and when it's not, and what it does to the outcome that occurs. And then the second thing is, pay attention to your reactions, the things you love and get ignited by, and the things you're like, oh no. And give yourself a moment to pause to say, I wonder what causes that in me. Remember the three fingers pointing back, and get curious about where that is in you, and it's time to reclaim.
Brilliant. brilliant way to end the conversation, our conversation. It was a generative conversation also, because it was really triggering my, I hope these people who are going to watch this and listen this going to have that same generative mentality and the whole attitude coming in. So ladies and gentlemen, that's the time what we have. You were listening to Janet M. Harvey. So thank you very much, Janet, for shedding this wonderful concept into our lives. It's amazing to listen to you, and it was an honor to listen to you as well. Of course, you can get connected to Janet with the social media platforms. I'll put all the platform on the social media links on the podcast note. If you want to explore what Janet does, please log on to www.invitechange.com. Again, this will be available on the podcast note to explore some of the work she does. On that note, Janet, once again, thank you very much for being a wonderful resource person for me today. You really gave me, I learned a lot. I hope I'll listen. So thank you very much and have a great day.
You're very, very welcome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you for tuning in to this podcast of EI Cafe with Azim. We sure do hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any questions, please do reach out. If you haven't done so already, make sure you subscribe to the show that is available on all major podcast platforms so you're notified when a new episode is posted. Please rate, review, and leave a comment and share it with your friends. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you're leaving with some great insights that can help you in your daily life. Follow Azim on social media and do write to us on topics and experts you'd like to hear from, and we will try to get them on board. Goodbye for now, until we meet again on another episode of EI Cafe with Azim.